In a world obsessed with rules, one man dared to break them all. He was never the smartest in the room. He was never the richest, the fastest, or the most likely to succeed. But he was the most relentless. He was the boy who couldn't sit still, the teenager who couldn't follow orders, the young man who couldn't accept no for an answer. He was the rebel who turned his weaknesses into weapons. He was the dreamer who built an empire from nothing but a wild idea and a stubborn heart. He was the risk-taker who bet everything, again and again, on the impossible. He was the billionaire who never wore a tie, who never played it safe, who never stopped asking, why not? He was the leader who inspired millions to challenge the status quo, to laugh in the face of fear, to live life on their own terms. He was the adventurer who crossed oceans, soared through the sky, and stared death in the face, just to prove it could be done. He was the entrepreneur who built a brand that became a revolution. He was the man who made business fun, who made failure cool, who made the world believe in the power of a single, rebellious idea. This is the story of Richard Branson, the rebel billionaire, the rule breaker, the game changer, the man who refused to be ordinary, the man who taught us all that the greatest risk is not taking one. But before the world knew his name, before the headlines and the headlines and the headlines, before the record-breaking flights and the billion-dollar deals, there was just a boy. A boy with a stutter, a boy with a dream, a boy who would change the world, but not before the world tried to break him. Richard Branson was born into a world that didn't quite know what to do with him. It was July 18, 1950, in the leafy suburbs of Surrey, England. The world was still recovering from war, still rebuilding, still learning how to hope again. His father, Edward, was a barrister, a man of logic, of order, of tradition. His mother, Eve, was a force of nature, fierce, fearless, and utterly unconventional. From the very beginning, Richard was different. He struggled in school. Words danced on the page, refusing to stay still. Letters twisted and turned, mocking him. Dyslexia, they called it, but back then it was just called stupid. Teachers shook their heads. He'll never amount to much, they whispered, but his mother saw something else. She saw a spark. She saw a boy who refused to give up, no matter how many times he fell. She saw a boy who would climb the tallest tree, who would ride his bike faster than anyone else, who would get lost in the woods just to see what was on the other side. She saw a boy who was born to break the rules. Eve Branson was not a typical mother. She believed in tough love. She believed in independence. She believed in throwing her children into the deep end and watching them swim. When Richard was just 4 years old, she stopped the car miles from home and told him to find his own way back. When he was 6, she sent him out to sell budgerigars, tiny, colorful birds, door to door. When he was 8, she gave him a challenge: learn to swim or be left behind. Every lesson was a test. Every test was a chance to grow. Richard learned early that life would not hand him anything. If he wanted something, he would have to fight for it. He would have to earn it. He would have to create it, but the world was not kind to dreamers. School was a battlefield. The classroom was a prison. The rules were suffocating. Richard's mind wandered. He dreamed of adventure, of freedom, of something more. He failed test after test. He was labeled hopeless. He was told to lower his expectations, but he refused. He refused to believe that his future was written in red ink. He refused to accept that his destiny was failure. He refused to let anyone else define him. At home, his mother cheered him on. She told him he could do anything. She told him the world was his for the taking. She told him to never, ever give up. His father, quiet and steady, offered a different kind of support. He listened. He encouraged. He believed. Together, they gave Richard the greatest gift a child can receive: the freedom to be himself. But freedom comes with a price. Richard's childhood was a constant struggle. He was always the odd one out, always the misfit, always the rebel. He learned to laugh at his mistakes. He learned to turn embarrassment into energy. He learned to use his differences as fuel. He learned that the only way to survive was to keep moving forward. He learned that the only way to win was to never stop playing. By the time he was a teenager, Richard was already dreaming bigger than anyone around him. He wanted to change the world. He wanted to prove everyone wrong. He wanted to show that the rebel could win. But first he would have to survive. He would have to fight. He would have to find his own way. And nothing would ever come easy. But what happened next would test Richard in ways he could never have imagined. Because the world doesn't reward rebels, it tries to break them. And Richard Branson was about to find out just how hard the world could hit. The teenage years are never easy, but for Richard Branson, they were a crucible. He was 16 years old, restless, frustrated, and desperate to escape the suffocating walls of school. He knew he didn't fit in. He knew he would never be the top of the class. He knew he would never be the teacher's favorite, but he also knew something else. He knew he had a voice. He knew he had ideas. He knew he wanted to make a difference, so he did the unthinkable. He dropped out. He walked away from the safety of the classroom, the comfort of routine, the expectations of everyone around him. He walked into the unknown. He walked into the fire. Most people would have been terrified, but Richard was exhilarated. He saw opportunity where others saw risk. He saw freedom where others saw danger. He saw possibility where others saw failure. He started small, a magazine, a voice for the voiceless, a platform for the young, the restless, the rebellious. He called it Student. It was a magazine for students by students about students. It was a magazine that challenged authority, questioned the status quo, and demanded change. It was a magazine that gave Richard Branson his first taste of entrepreneurship. But it was also a magazine that nearly destroyed him. He had no money, no experience, no connections. He had nothing but a dream. He worked day and night, writing, editing, selling ads, delivering copies by hand. He begged, borrowed, and hustled. He faced rejection after rejection. Doors slammed in his face. Phones hung up. Letters returned unopened. But he refused to quit. He refused to give up. He refused to let the world silence him. He scraped together enough money to print the first issue. He convinced advertisers to take a chance on a kid with nothing but a wild idea. He convinced writers to contribute for free. He convinced readers to care. Slowly, painfully, the magazine began to grow. It became a voice for a generation. It became a movement. It became the first spark of the Virgin Empire. But the struggle was far from over. Richard was broke. He lived in a cramped, cold basement. He ate beans on toast. He wore the same clothes day after day. He worked until he collapsed. He sacrificed everything for his dream. But the world didn't care. The world didn't notice. The world kept pushing back, but Richard kept pushing forward. He learned to embrace rejection. He learned to turn no into not yet. He learned that every failure was just another step on the road to success. He learned that the only way to win was to keep playing the game. He learned that the only way to survive was to keep moving forward, but the pressure was relentless. The doubts were overwhelming. The fear was suffocating. He wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. He wondered if he was chasing a fantasy. He wondered if he would ever make it. But deep down, he knew one thing. He knew he was a rebel. He knew he was a fighter. He knew he would never, ever give up. But just when Richard thought he had found his path, life threw him a curveball he never saw coming. Because sometimes, the greatest struggles are the ones you never expect. And Richard Branson was about to face the fight of his life. Failure is a word that most people fear. For Richard Branson, it became a constant companion. The magazine Student was gaining traction, but it wasn't making money. Every issue was a battle. Every month was a question mark. Would there be enough to print the next edition? Would advertisers stick around? Would readers care? Richard was learning the hard way that passion alone doesn't pay the bills. He tried everything. He hustled for every ad. He wrote letters to celebrities, politicians, and musicians, begging for interviews. He sold space to anyone who would listen. He even tried to sell records by mail order, hoping to keep the magazine afloat. But the numbers never added up. The debts piled higher. The pressure mounted. The sleepless nights grew longer. Richard's friends and family began to worry. Was he chasing a lost cause? Was he throwing his life away on a dream that would never come true? But Richard refused to quit. He refused to let go. He refused to let failure define him. He doubled down. He worked harder. He pushed further. But the world kept pushing back. The magazine was bleeding money. The record business was barely a blip. The future looked bleak. And then disaster struck. A postal strike hit the UK. Suddenly, Richard's mail-order record business was dead in the water. Orders couldn't be delivered. Money couldn't come in. The fragile lifeline he had built was snapped in an instant. Richard was devastated. Everything he had worked for was slipping through his fingers. He was forced to make impossible choices. He had to let people go. He had to cut corners. He had to face the reality that his dream might be over before it had even begun. But even in the darkest moments, Richard found a way to fight back. He saw opportunity in chaos. If he couldn't deliver records by mail, he would sell them in person. He opened a tiny record shop above a shoe store on Oxford Street. It was scrappy, it was risky, it was desperate, but it was a start. He painted the walls. He played music loud. He made the shop a place where people wanted to be. He created a vibe. He created a community. He created something different, and slowly people started to notice. The shop became a hangout for music lovers, rebels, and dreamers. It became a place where the misfits belonged, but the setbacks kept coming. Richard was young. He was inexperienced. He made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He signed the wrong deals. He took risks that didn't pay off. He was nearly bankrupted by a bad business partner. He was almost shut down by the authorities for selling records too cheaply. He was raided by the police, accused of tax evasion, dragged through the mud. He was humiliated. He was scared. He was alone, but he refused to give in. He learned from every mistake. He got smarter. He got tougher. He learned that failure is not the end, it's just the beginning. He learned that every setback is a setup for a comeback. He learned that the only way to win is to keep getting up, no matter how many times you're knocked down. But the world wasn't done testing him. The music business was changing. The competition was fierce. The margins were razor thin. Richard was fighting for survival every single day. He was living on the edge, risking everything, betting it all on a dream. And then, just when things seemed to be turning around, disaster struck again. A fire ripped through the record shop, destroying everything. Richard watched as his dream went up in smoke. He stood in the ashes, heartbroken, defeated, lost. But even then, he refused to quit. He rebuilt. He started over. He found a way, because that's what rebels do. They don't let failure stop them. They use it as fuel. They use it as fire. They use it to rise. But just when Richard thought he had faced the worst, life delivered a blow that would shake him to his core. Because sometimes, the greatest failures aren't about business. They're about the battles you fight inside yourself. And Richard Branson was about to face his darkest hour. There are moments in every life when the world seems to close in. When the noise of doubt drowns out every hope. When the weight of failure presses so hard, you can barely breathe. For Richard Branson, that moment came quietly in the dead of night when no one was watching. He was young, but he felt old. He was surrounded by people, but he felt utterly alone. The world saw a rebel, a risk-taker, a dreamer. But inside, Richard was fighting a war no one else could see. The debts were suffocating. The pressure was relentless. The fear was overwhelming. He had risked everything. His reputation, his family's money, his own future, on a dream that seemed to be slipping away. He lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the question that every entrepreneur faces in the darkness. What if I fail? What if everyone was right about me? What if I really am just a foolish boy with my head in the clouds? What if I lose everything? The doubts crept in, slow and poisonous. They whispered in his ear, telling him to give up, to walk away, to accept defeat. He thought about the people who believed in him, his parents who had sacrificed so much, his friends who had followed him into the unknown, his team who had worked for nothing but a promise. He thought about letting them down. He thought about the shame, the humiliation, the headlines. He thought about the future he might never have. And for the first time, Richard Branson felt the cold grip of despair. He tried to hide it. He tried to laugh it off. He tried to keep moving forward. But inside he was breaking. He was exhausted. He was scared. He was lost. He began to question everything. Was it worth it? Was the dream worth the pain? Was the fight worth the scars? He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a boy who had lost his way, a rebel without a cause. He tried to remember why he started. He tried to remember the fire that once burned so bright. But all he could see was darkness. The world kept moving. The bills kept coming. The problems kept piling up. Richard felt like he was drowning. He tried to reach out, but the words wouldn't come. He tried to ask for help, but pride held him back. He was supposed to be the fearless one, the leader, the visionary, but inside he was just a scared kid fighting to keep his head above water. He began to withdraw. He stopped answering calls. He stopped showing up. He stopped believing. He felt the walls closing in. He felt the dream slipping away. He felt himself falling. And then, in the quiet of his darkest night, Richard Branson made a decision. He decided to let go. He decided to surrender. He decided to face the truth. He was not invincible. He was not unbreakable. He was not immune to pain. He was human. He was vulnerable. He was afraid. But in that moment of surrender, something shifted. He realized that he didn't have to do it alone. He realized that asking for help was not weakness, it was strength. He realized that failure was not the end, it was a new beginning. He reached out to his family. He opened up to his friends. He let people in. He allowed himself to feel. He allowed himself to grieve. He allowed himself to heal. And slowly the darkness began to lift. He found comfort in the people who loved him. He found hope in the kindness of strangers. He found strength in the simple act of surviving. He learned that rock bottom is not a place of death. It is a place of rebirth. It is the place where you discover who you really are. It is the place where you find the courage to start again. Richard Branson faced his demons. He faced his fears. He faced the truth. And in doing so, he found something he never expected. He found himself. He found the rebel inside. He found the fire that could never be extinguished. He found the strength to rise. But just as Richard began to find his footing, a single moment, a flash of inspiration, would change everything. Because sometimes all it takes is one decision to turn darkness into light. And Richard Branson was about to make the choice that would define his destiny. Sometimes, the most powerful moments in life arrive quietly. They don't come with fanfare or fireworks. They come in the stillness, in the aftermath of pain, when the heart is raw and the mind is open. For Richard Branson, the turning point came not in a boardroom, but in a moment of stillness, when he finally stopped running from his fears and started listening to them. He was sitting alone, surrounded by the debris of his shattered dreams. The record shop had burned. The debts were mounting. The future was uncertain. But in that silence, Richard heard something he hadn't heard in a long time. He heard his own voice. He heard the voice of the boy who climbed trees, who raced his bike, who got lost in the woods just to see what was on the other side. He heard the voice of the rebel. And that voice whispered a single, powerful question. What if you try again? What if you take everything you've learned, the pain, the failure, the heartbreak, and use it as fuel? What if you stop trying to fit in and start embracing what makes you different? What if you stop playing by the rules and start writing your own? Richard felt a surge of energy, a spark of hope, a flicker of the old fire. He realized that he had been fighting the wrong battle. He had been trying to prove himself to the world, to silence the critics, to win the approval of people who would never understand him. But he didn't need their approval. He didn't need their permission. He only needed to believe in himself. He only needed to trust his own instincts. He only needed to be the rebel he was born to be. Richard made a decision that would change everything. He would rebuild. He would start over. He would take the lessons of failure and turn them into the foundation of something new. He would create a business that was different, a business that was fun, a business that broke the rules. He would create a brand that stood for something. He would create Virgin. The name was a joke at first, a nod to their inexperience, their naivety, their willingness to try anything. But it became a symbol of youth, a symbol of rebellion, a symbol of possibility. Richard gathered his team. He shared his vision. He inspired them to believe. He told them that they were not just selling records, they were creating a movement. They were giving a voice to the voiceless. They were challenging the status quo. They were making business fun. He poured his heart into the new Virgin Records shop. He made it a place where people wanted to be. He made it a place where music lovers could gather, where rebels could belong, where dreams could be born. He took risks. He made bold moves. He signed artists no one else would touch. He bet everything on the power of passion. And slowly, the tide began to turn. People started to notice. The shop became a sensation. The Virgin brand began to grow. Richard felt alive again. He felt the old fire burning. He felt the thrill of the chase. He realized that the greatest risk is not taking one. He realized that the only way to win is to play your own game. He realized that the only way to live is to be true to yourself. Richard Branson had found his purpose. He had found his path. He had found the courage to rise, but the journey was far from over. The world was watching. The stakes were higher than ever. The risks were greater, but Richard was ready. He was no longer afraid of failure. He was no longer afraid of being different. He was no longer afraid of the unknown. He was ready to take on the world. He was ready to build an empire. He was ready to become the rebel billionaire. But as Richard set out to conquer new heights, he had no idea what challenges and what triumphs awaited him. Because the rise to greatness is never a straight line, and for Richard Branson, the real adventure was just beginning. The world loves a comeback. But it rarely sees the work, the sweat, the sleepless nights that make it possible. For Richard Branson, the rise was not a single leap. It was 1,000 small steps, each one fueled by stubborn hope and relentless belief. Virgin Records was more than a shop. It was a revolution. It was a place where music was alive, where the rules were rewritten, where the misfits found their anthem. Richard poured his soul into every detail. He made the shop a sanctuary for music lovers. He played the latest records loud, let customers lounge on beanbags, and created an atmosphere that felt more like a party than a business. He listened to his customers. He asked what they wanted. He made them feel seen, heard, and valued. He built a community, not just a company, and the world responded. Word spread. The shop became a destination. People traveled for miles just to experience the Virgin vibe. But Richard wasn't satisfied. He saw a bigger future. He saw a world where Virgin wasn't just a shop, but a label, a force in the music industry. He took another risk. He borrowed money, mortgaged everything, and launched Virgin Records as a label. He signed artists no one else believed in. He bet on the outsiders, the rebels, the voices that didn't fit the mold. He signed Mike Oldfield, a young musician with a haunting, experimental album called Tubular Bells. The industry laughed, the critics scoffed, but Richard believed. He poured everything into the launch. He hustled, he promoted, he made sure everyone heard the music. And then the impossible happened. Tubular Bells became a sensation. It topped the charts. It sold millions. It put Virgin Records on the map. Richard had done it. He had turned failure into triumph. He had turned pain into power. But he didn't stop there. He kept pushing. He kept dreaming. He kept breaking the rules. He signed the Sex Pistols when no one else would touch them. He embraced punk, chaos, and controversy. He made Virgin the home of the rebels, the outcasts, the visionaries. He took risks that terrified his competitors. He bet on the future, not the past. He built a team of believers, people who shared his passion, his vision, his willingness to risk everything for a dream. He inspired loyalty, not through fear but through freedom. He let his team make mistakes. He let them learn, grow, and lead. He created a culture of adventure, of possibility, of fun, and the world took notice. Virgin Records exploded. The label signed hit after hit. The brand became synonymous with innovation, excitement, and rebellion. Richard became a star. He was the face of Virgin, the wild-haired, grinning, risk-taking entrepreneur who made business look like an adventure. But behind the scenes, the pressure was immense. The stakes were higher. The risks were greater. The failures were more public. Richard faced lawsuits, betrayals, and near bankruptcy. He lost friends. He made enemies. He fought battles that threatened to destroy everything he had built. But he never lost faith. He never lost his sense of humor. He never lost his love for the game. He kept moving forward, no matter how hard the world pushed back. He learned to embrace uncertainty. He learned to dance with chaos. He learned to find opportunity in every crisis. He learned that the only way to win was to keep playing. He learned that the only way to grow was to keep risking. He learned that the only way to lead was to keep believing. Richard Branson was no longer just a rebel. He was a force of nature. He was a leader. He was a builder. He was a dreamer who refused to wake up. And as Virgin soared, Richard's dreams grew bigger. He saw new worlds to conquer. He saw new industries to disrupt. He saw new adventures waiting just beyond the horizon. He launched Virgin Atlantic, taking on the giants of the airline industry. He bet everything on a single plane, a single route, a single chance. He faced ridicule, skepticism, and sabotage, but he refused to back down. He made flying fun. He made it exciting. He made it an experience. He put the customer first. He put the fun back in business. And once again, the world responded. Virgin Atlantic became a sensation. It challenged the status quo. It forced the industry to change. Richard Branson had done the impossible again. But the journey was far from over. With every victory came new challenges. With every success came new risks. Richard kept pushing. He kept dreaming. He kept rising. He launched new ventures, Virgin Trains, Virgin Mobile, Virgin Galactic. He took on the impossible, the unthinkable, the unimaginable. He risked everything again and again. He failed again and again. But he never stopped. He never gave up. He never lost the fire. Because for Richard Branson, the journey was the reward. The adventure was the point. The rise was never about the money, the fame, or the power. It was about proving that anything is possible. It was about showing the world that rebels can win. It was about inspiring others to dream bigger, risk more, and live fully. Richard Branson was rising, and he was taking the world with him. But as Richard's empire grew, so did the dangers. Because the higher you climb, the harder the world tries to pull you down. And Richard Branson was about to face the greatest test of his life, one that would threaten everything he had built and force him to fight for his legacy. Success is never a finish line. For Richard Branson, it was a launching pad, a place to leap from, not a place to rest. The world saw a billionaire, a mogul, a man who had it all. But Richard saw only new horizons, new challenges, new frontiers to explore. Virgin was no longer just a record label. It was a movement. It was a brand that stood for adventure, for rebellion, for possibility. It was a flag planted in the heart of every industry it touched. Richard's vision was boundless. He looked at the world and saw broken systems, tired traditions, and endless opportunities to shake things up. He believed that business could be fun, that work could be play, that profit and purpose could live side by side. He built Virgin Atlantic from a single leased plane and a wild idea. He took on the airline giants, the entrenched powers, the skeptics who said it couldn't be done. He made flying glamorous again. He made it personal. He made it unforgettable. He greeted passengers at the gate. He poured champagne at 30,000 feet. He turned every flight into an event. He made the impossible look easy. But behind every smile, every headline, every victory, there was a storm of risk, sacrifice, and sleepless nights. Richard mortgaged everything, again and again. He put his fortune, his reputation, his very name on the line. He fought legal battles that threatened to destroy him. He faced sabotage, betrayal, and relentless competition. He lost millions. He made mistakes. He trusted the wrong people. He was stabbed in the back by partners, outmaneuvered by rivals, and nearly bankrupted by forces beyond his control. But he never stopped moving forward. He never stopped believing. He never stopped building. Virgin became a global empire. Virgin Trains reimagined rail travel. Virgin Mobile disrupted telecommunications. Virgin Money challenged the banks. Virgin Galactic set its sights on the stars. Richard was everywhere, on the ground, in the air, and soon in space. He became a symbol of possibility. A living, breathing reminder that the world belongs to the bold. He inspired millions. He mentored young entrepreneurs. He gave back, launching foundations and charities, fighting for the environment, for equality, for a better world. He made business a force for good. He made failure a badge of honor. He made risk a way of life. But the higher he climbed, the more the world tried to pull him down. The media circled, waiting for him to fall. The competition sharpened their knives. The markets turned, the economy crashed, the winds shifted. Richard faced crisis after crisis. He lost companies. He lost friends. He lost sleep. But he never lost hope. He never lost his sense of humor. He never lost his love for the game. He kept building. He kept dreaming. He kept rising. He surrounded himself with people who believed. He built teams that were loyal, passionate, and fearless. He gave them freedom. He gave them trust. He gave them the chance to fail and the courage to try again. He created a culture of adventure, of innovation, of relentless optimism. He made Virgin a family. He made it a home for rebels, for dreamers, for anyone who dared to believe that business could change the world. And the world responded. Virgin became a household name. The red logo became a symbol of fun, of freedom, of possibility. Richard became a billionaire. He became a knight. He became a legend, but he never forgot where he came from. He never forgot the boy who couldn't read, the teenager who dropped out, the young man who risked everything on a dream. He never forgot the pain, the struggle, the darkness. He carried it with him every step of the way. He used it as fuel. He used it as fire. He used it to light the way for others. Richard Branson built an empire, but more than that, he built a legacy. He built a life that mattered. He built a story that inspired the world, and he did it all by breaking the rules, by refusing to be ordinary, by daring to be different, by living life on his own terms. But even as the world celebrated his success, Richard knew that the journey was far from over. Because true greatness is not measured by what you have, but by what you give. And Richard Branson was just getting started. But as Richard looked to the future, he faced a new question, one that would test everything he believed, everything he had built, and everything he stood for. Because legacy is not just about what you leave behind. It's about how you live every single day. and Richard Branson was about to discover the true meaning of success. What does it mean to leave a mark on the world? For Richard Branson, legacy was never about the money, the headlines, or the trophies. It was about the lives he touched, the rules he shattered, the hope he sparked in others. He believed that business was not just a way to make a living, it was a way to make a difference. He believed that every company, every brand, every venture was a chance to change the world for the better. Richard's philosophy was simple but radical. Have fun, do good, be bold. Never give up. He lived by these words. He built his empire on them. He taught them to everyone who joined the Virgin family. He believed in people. He believed in giving second chances. He believed that everyone had something unique to offer, if only they were given the freedom to try. He encouraged his teams to take risks, to make mistakes, to learn and grow. He celebrated failure as a stepping stone to greatness. He believed that the greatest leaders are the ones who listen, who care, who lift others up. He believed in kindness, in laughter, in adventure. He believed that life was too short to play it safe. Richard's daily habits were deceptively simple. He woke up early. He exercised. He spent time with his family. He wrote down his ideas, his goals, his dreams. He made time for fun, for friends, for the little moments that make life worth living. He practiced gratitude. He gave back. He used his wealth and influence to fight for causes he believed in: climate change, global health, social justice. He never stopped learning. He never stopped growing. He never stopped dreaming. He taught his children to be curious, to be brave, to be kind. He taught the world that success is not about being the smartest, the richest, or the most powerful. It's about being the most persistent. It's about being the most passionate. It's about being the most true to yourself. Richard's legacy is not just the companies he built, but the lives he changed. The young entrepreneurs he inspired. The rebels he gave a home. The dreamers he showed how to fly. He taught us that the only limits are the ones we accept. He taught us that the only failure is not trying. He taught us that the only way to live is to leap. He taught us that the world needs more rebels, more risk-takers, more people willing to ask, why not? He taught us that the greatest adventure is the one you create for yourself. He taught us that the greatest legacy is a life well lived, a life of courage, a life of kindness, a life of relentless, unstoppable hope. But as Richard Branson's story nears its final chapter, there is one last lesson, one final, unforgettable truth that every dreamer, every rebel, every entrepreneur must hear. Because the end of the journey is only the beginning, and Richard Branson's greatest gift is not what he built, but what he leaves behind in all of us. This is the legacy of Richard Branson. A boy who was told he'd never amount to anything. A teenager who dropped out, who stumbled, who failed. A young man who risked everything, again and again, on nothing but a dream. A rebel who refused to be ordinary. A leader who made business an adventure. A billionaire who never lost his sense of wonder. He taught us that the world is not changed by those who follow the rules. It is changed by those who dare to break them. He showed us that failure is not the end. It is the beginning of something greater. He proved that kindness is a strength, that laughter is a weapon, that hope is a choice. He built an empire not on fear but on freedom, not on power but on possibility. He lived every day as if it were his last. He chased every dream as if it were his first. He stared down the impossible and smiled. He taught us to leap even when we're afraid, to speak up even when our voice shakes, to stand out even when the world tells us to fit in. He showed us that the greatest risk is not taking one, that the greatest failure is not trying, that the greatest adventure is the one we create for ourselves. He reminded us that life is short, that dreams are fragile, that courage is everything. He inspired us to build, to believe, to belong. He gave us permission to be different, to be bold, to be rebels. He left us with a challenge: Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the world to change. Be the one who changes it. Be the one who dares. Be the one who dreams. Because the world needs more rebels. The world needs more hope. The world needs more people like Richard Branson. And maybe, just maybe, the world needs you. So go, break the rules. Chase the impossible, live your adventure, and never ever give up. Because the story isn't over, it's just beginning, and the next chapter is yours.